Good morning, all. So, in our previous class, we were discussing about SOSL queries, so Salesforce Object Search Language. Yes, so how we are going to write an SOSL query, what is static SOSL query, and what is dynamic SOSL query. So, all this we have discussed, and we have written a small SOSL query for executing on our query editor, and also a small Apex program for our SOSL static SOSL query, and how we are going to do what is the return type of our SOSL query, and how we are going to do the manual typecasting for fetching the results of our SOSL query, right? So that is about the SOSL queries. Mm, right. So maximum 20 SOSL queries per transaction, and SOSL query can return maximum of 2000 records at a time, and we can query maximum of 20 objects at a time using SOSL query. And we can, the main thing is we will be querying the search text for across the objects, not on a single object, using SOSL queries. Right. So that was all about the SOSL queries which we have discussed. So moving on to the next topic. Right. So till now we were writing the let's say class code, and we were writing some kind of business logic in our methods, right? So how we are going to execute them? So we are um, so how we are going to execute them? We are just writing our um, in the execute anonymous window, we are writing, since this is a static method I have, so I'm using class name dot method name accounts helper dot insert account record. So this is how I need to call my method for executing my business logic, right? So this is what we were doing, and this we are doing it from execute anonymous window, right? So what if I want to execute without going into the execute anonymous window? I want to execute based on certain criteria. So in that case, we have a concept called as triggers. So based on the events getting fired, so our trigger is going to get executed. So based on the inputs we give on our triggers, it's going to run automatically for you. So we are not going to manually execute anything in our execute anonymous window. So it's the trigger is going to run in the background. So so trigger is so triggers are used for uh, implementing the custom business logics, which will be executed automatically on based on the type of DML event. So we have the DML events, right? DML operations, right? So insert, update, delete, undelete, right? So these are our DML operations, which we already have discussed. So based on the DML operations being performed, if we want to execute some kind of code, uh, so our triggers can do it, right? So that's one scenario. Let's take an example of, so we have discussed something called roll-up summary fields, right? So can anyone say where I can create a roll-up summary field, in which type of relationship?
Master detail.
Right. So in master detail relationship, I can create a roll up summary field. But my requirement is like I have two objects which are in lookup relationship and I want a roll up summary field to be created. So what's the solution? Can you think of?
Usually we have to change the relationship, right?
Right. See, the thing is, I don't want to change the complete functionality by changing the relationship. I only want just one single thing that is roll up summary field in my two objects which are related in lookup. So I don't want to change the relationship, but I want a roll up summary field to be created. For that
So
scenario, we can go ahead and create an Apex trigger. Okay, so we
yeah.
can create a new roll-up summary field on our child object with the help of our trigger. Okay, so this kind of scenarios where we cannot do it from the configuration and where we need some kind of automatically firing code to run in the background. So triggers are the best uh, option for us. So we can almost like we can implement through programming, but yes, there are some events which we do not want the events, the DML events, which we do not want them to be uh, performed unless until some kind of validations are performed, right? So yeah, you can ask me like you can say we have validation rules in place, right? So yes, we have validation rules, but those are going to just check the validation, perform the validation, but they are not going to modify any records or something. But whereas in our triggers, we can do the validation, we can do the deduplication, we can eliminate the unnecessary records. So in our by making use of the concept of triggers. So let me show you a small scenario where like, so let's go to our org. Okay. So I'm on my accounts. So let's say, let me go to a leads page and let me take, okay, we have sample test lead accounts. So there are multiple of this. Let's go to the opportunities. So I wanted to create a new opportunity record. So I want to create an opportunity for my already existing some data loader account and it's of type. So these are all the mandatory fields. Okay. So let's say I want to save. Okay. So test trigger opportunity record has been created and go here. I want to clone it and save it. So there is one more record created. I want to go again, save, right? So here, if you see opportunities, we created three records, three duplicate records. Okay, right? So like this, when we will have in the real-time scenario, we will be having the deduplication which needs to be worked upon for refining the data as well as keeping the data consistent. So for that case, we will be using the triggers And in the triggers, we will have multiple events, the DML events. So now what I did, so I have created, right? That means insert new record. So insert is a DML operation. So in this particular DML operation, insert, before inserting, I want to do some, perform some business logic. Okay. So maybe the deduplication, maybe testing the validation of data, maybe I wanted, this is a child record in a lookup. I want to create a roll up summary field for it. Yeah, maybe that is the case. So this kind of scenarios, if we want to work, probably trigger is the best concept where we can go ahead and use it. Okay. So we can fire the triggers based on the DML operations inside, mentioned inside it. Okay. So when I say DML operations, it's all that we discussed: insert, update, delete, insert, update, delete, and what other operations? Merge, undelete, right? So these are all the DML operations which we have discussed. So those DML operations are going to be as an input to our trigger. Those are called DML events. So we are going to handle the DML events with the help of triggers. Of course, we can handle any type of event through the UI programming with the help of our um, Lightning Web components or Visual Force components or Aura components. We can design a UI and create an event for it. That is one way of working, but this is like on the data from the configuration in the real-time scenario. Let's say on my Salesforce org, I have n number of users and I have lakhs of records, and I am the administrator for this particular account, let's say, and I don't want the data to be uh, so much of duplicates and inconsistent data. So I don't want that kind of scenario to happen the to my Salesforce org data. Okay. So in that case, I would be placing in writing so many triggers in place. So whenever a user, there will be multiple users who will be using my Salesforce org. So whenever user is like, they do not know a few things. They only know like they will have to do this part of it, right? So they do not know the complete background of the data, how the data has been will be refined, how the data should be maintained consistently, and how we should avoid duplicates. So they do not know all these things. So that's where I write an Apex trigger where it is throwing him errors wherever he goes uh, in a wrong way. So let's say now I did a clone of records and 3 duplicate records I have created, right? So the user, there is a possibility the user can create that way. And one of the mandatory field, he was using the same field value for all the records. So those kind of mistakes can happen with the users. That's where I write an Apex trigger in order to make sure my data is going to be consistent. Okay. So by using triggers, we can implement custom validations, and complex business logics, and also complex transactional flows inside the application. Okay. So that means like mostly we will be dealing with the DML events. So there are different types of DML events which we are going to discuss. So while preparing the business logic inside the trigger, so we can use all the DML statements and SOQL queries also, right? Yeah, we can use SOSL as well, right? So preferably SOQL, because SOSL comes in real-time scenario with different um, industry type organizations. Okay, maybe the online retail and e-commerce type of applications mostly. So yeah, it depends. So that's where we use DML statements, SOQL queries in more frequently in our triggers. And each trigger, should be associated with an object. So we can write a trigger on an object. Okay. So for placing some kind of validation, some kind of um, avoiding duplication errors. Okay, but so each trigger is associated with one object, and one object can have multiple triggers created for it. Okay, so that's the relationship. So how we are going to write our trigger. So this is the syntax of how we are going to write a trigger name on object name. As I told you, uh, a trigger is associated with one object. Okay, but the same object can have multiple triggers. Okay, trigger name on object name, DML events list, and write down the business logic. So when I say business logic, it includes like what you want, what operations you want to perform. Okay, so let's take an example of trigger. First trigger on account, let's say. Yeah, here DML events list can be insert, update, delete, right? So the that is those are the DML events. So we have two types of DML events: before events and after events. So before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, and after undelete. So these are the DML events which we are going to have. Okay, so this trigger, I want to fire it when uh, before inserting any type of record. Okay, so we will be writing the business logic here. So we have for triggers, we have multiple things like trigger context variables, and which we are going to discuss, and the DML events which we are going to discuss, right? So that is the syntax for triggers. So triggers have multiple events, the DML events. So event describes when a trigger should get fired inside the organization. So while creating trigger, we can specify like one or more events. We can specify more than one event also on which the trigger should get fired. Okay. So the in the events which I have written before insert, right? So there I can write multiple events also. That's one event. So before insert on the account object, this particular business logic is going to execute. So what I'm doing, I have to write the business logic for checking the validations. Let's say for account object, I need a billing city for sure. So I would be mentioning that, right? So some kind of validation. So, and for account industry field, I need industry field to be compulsorily present. So yes, I can write logic for that in my trigger. So if the user is creating an account record without industry, without value in the industry field, so it's going to throw an error to him and he will not be able to create that record, right? So the events, when I say the DML events, there are like 7 events. So before and after events. Before events are insert, update, delete. Before insert, before update, before delete. And after insert, after update, after delete. And there is one other operation after undelete. Okay. So these are the 7 trigger events which we have: before events and after events. And while writing trigger, we will be using at least one of this event, because that's where the trigger is going to be get fired based on this particular event type. Okay, so it's mandatory to mention at least one event for a trigger to get fired. Okay, so let's discuss those 7 operations in detail. So these are the 7 events which we are going to discuss in detail. So all those events are trigger events. So we will have to mention at least one event here in our trigger for the trigger to fire based on that particular event type. Okay. So before insert, if you say, so this event will get fired on the trigger before inserting the record inside the object. Okay. So in our example, we have taken before insert, right? So this trigger will fire before insert. Before insert, when I say before insert, it is like before inserting, committing the data to the database. Okay, before committing. That means before getting the data saved on the database. So that's where before insert trigger event, DML event will work. So this event will fire the trigger before inserting the record inside the object. Okay. So if you take an example, so let's take trigger, lead trigger on lead before insert, and we will be writing the business logic for that particular before insert operation. So the second one is before update. So this event will fire the trigger on before updating the record in the object. Okay. So let's take, so before insert, what is the scenario you can think of? Like, what before insert event you want to place? Maybe the deduplication, that's one scenario. And maybe what else? Validation, that's the other scenario. And custom validations which we'll be performing. So let's say user has to enter email address, and I want to verify whether that email address is present or not. So for that, I can write down my trigger code saying trigger code to send a test email with a code, and that code needs to be entered in the in the user interface. And once it's verified, that means the email is valid email address. That means I'm avoiding the duplicate email addresses. So yes, that is one scenario before insert. So that's what we can do the validations using the before insert event. And before update, so this event will fire the trigger before updating the record in the object, right? So when do we do an update operation? So usually, so when we have something like, mm, let's say I have a lead object record and I am working on that particular record. So the progress, I will have to progress the lead record, and I wanted to mark the status as open contacted. Okay. So yes, we can do it. So I'm going to update that particular record. So in that scenario, once it is updated as let's
One question here, Dilip.
yes, yes, go ahead.
So before insert event, right?
Mm.
Does it fire when the record we are creating is saved, or is it like the validation rule when we are trying to enter something in the field, it will fire? For example,
Before the record gets saved.
okay, just
Okay.
like the
So,
validation rule.
yes,
Okay.
like validation, but
Custom.
validation rules cannot modify the data, where in trigger I can also do some operations also.
Okay.
Yeah. So before, yeah, as I was saying you before, the data is committed to database. Okay. So before saved on, before before the record getting saved. So here are my lead records. Let's take sample lead 50. So working contacted, if I want to save it, so I want to mark it as working contacted, right? So whenever, so I want to create a lead record, like, sorry, a trigger when my lead record is closed, not converted. So whenever that particular status is updated on my lead record, so I want to create a trigger. And so the person who is marking this as closed, not converted, that means the lead is not converted to an account. I mean, we lost the customer. So I want to understand more details why this particular lead record has been lost. Okay. So in that case, so for when I mark the status as closed, not converted, so in that case, I wanted my uh, person who is performing the update operation on this particular record to give me more details. So I can write a business logic for in a trigger when this status changes in this particular way, not converted. So he will have to give me a little more uh, description, like what is the reason why it was not converted. Okay. So that means, like, before updating the status of this particular, this record is already in my system. So before updating the status, I wanted to perform some operations. That's where our before update event comes into picture, right? So the next one is before delete. So this event will fire fire the trigger on before deleting the record from the object. So the scenarios are like, we have records which are in lookup relationship. We have records which are in master detail relationship, right? So whenever we delete record, a parent record of lookup relationship, so there is no harm for the child record in the lookup relationship. But whenever I delete parent record in the master detail relationship, it won't allow you, because it says there are some child records associated with this record. So you will have to first delete that, right? So that's where we need to do some perform some business logic, first deleting all the child records related to our current record, and then delete this current record also. So that's where before delete I have to perform some operations where my before delete event, DML event, comes into picture. So yeah, this so this event fires like before deleting it. So before deleting, instead of me getting that toast event message, I want to handle that before. So that's where I wanted to delete the child records first and then the parent record uh, using my trigger. So that's where before delete DML events are used. And coming to the after insert, so this event will fire the trigger after inserting the record inside the object. So yes, you might have like questions like, what is the use of uh, after inserting the record, what are we going to do? What is the trigger going to do, right? So yes, there are cases like whenever let's say a new lead record has been inserted. Okay. So after inserting a new lead record, I have a couple of operations I wanted to perform, like sending an email to the new lead record, greeting him and uh, thanking him for showing interest in our business, right? So that means after insert, I want to send him an email. So that's the operation which I want to perform. So after insert of any lead record, I want to send an email to the person who registered in the lead record and say, thank you for registering with us, and we would be happy to help you, something like that. Okay, so that's where the scenario comes in. So after insert also, we will be needing to perform some kind of operations on our records. So that's the after insert and after update. So yes, after updating also, we may have to perform some operations. Let's say whenever a case has been closed, marked as closed. Okay. So I wanted to send an mean the case has been worked. Maybe the service representative has worked on this particular case. He had a call with the customer. He fixed the issue, and finally he is going to close the case. And that's where I wanted to send an email confirmation to the customer saying these are the steps performed and this is how your issue has been fixed. So yeah, hence we are proceeding to close our case record, right? So that's where after update, I want to send an email to customer. Okay. So after update can have something like we can send email alerts to the required users. We can update the roll-up summary fields. We can update related child records also, and we can share the records to the required users. Okay. So yes, Apex sharing, where when we were discussing about admin or the configuration part, so we were discussing about manual sharing and Apex sharing, right? Automated sharing, Apex sharing, right? So we were doing the manual sharing, automated sharing, and in the Apex also we can write a trigger to share our records as soon as a new record has been created. So making use of our triggers, we can write a code saying as soon as a new account record has been created by team member user one. So I wanted it to be shared to team member user two. So I can write a uh, trigger code for sharing that particular record. So we can also perform Apex sharing with the help of triggers. Okay. So next is after delete. This event will fire the trigger on after deleting the record from the object. Okay. So this one comes into picture in cases like I have a roll-up summary field. So one of my parent record has been deleted. So that's where I need to write a trigger code for my roll-up summary field to be uh, for my roll-up summary field to be updated. Okay. So after deleting the records, also we will have scenarios like uh, we need to send email to a customer. We need to uh, keep a track of the records which we have deleted. So in that case, we will be using the after delete DML event. Okay. So the next one, the last one is after undelete. So this event will fire the trigger after restoring the record back to the object from the recycle bin. So if you observe, we don't have something like before undelete, right? So this is an after event. Undelete is an after event. So once we do undelete, then what we need to do with our trigger. So we can write the code to update the roll-up summary fields. We can share the record. We can transfer the record to the required users, right? So after undeleting it, if it needs to be transferred to a different department of people. So probably we can transfer the record to the we can do undelete, and once it is undeleted, we will have to transfer it to the required user or queues. So we can do that. Okay. And yes, so as I was telling you in our trigger definition, so we can have more than one event in our trigger. So we need to have at least one DML event, but we can have more than one event also. Okay. So here before insert comma, before after insert. So I want to perform two different things. Before insert, I want to do the validations, and after insert, I want to send some emails. Okay. So how we are going to handle each of this event, we are going to discuss in detail on the triggers. So we have more things to come in. So before insert, we'll be doing the validation, and after insert, we will be sending some kind of finalizing the record details and sending email confirmations to the customer. So we can have multiple events listed on one single trigger. We can do that, but at least one one DML event for the trigger to trigger. Right. So how we can create triggers? So there are two different ways. One is uh, the standard navigation. The other one is through the developer console. So let me show you how we are going to. Right. So the standard navigation, go to the setup. In the quick find box, you can check for triggers. You have triggers. You can check for Apex triggers. So this is where all our triggers which we have written even in developer console also resides here. So there are no triggers as of now, and you can create a new trigger here. Okay, so the other way is like we will be doing it from our developer console. So here, so on our developer console, yeah, we have file new. So we have something called Apex trigger. We can create a new trigger here. I'm writing something like test trigger on my account object I want to go. Okay, so it's asking for the object also. Click on submit. Right, so this is how my trigger is going to look like. Trigger name on account, the object name, followed by the DML event. Okay, by default, it is taking before insert, but yes, if you want to have more events, you can do it after insert also. You can do it more events, at least one event, one DML event for the trigger to get fired. Okay, you can have more number of events also, but not the contradicting events. Okay, so let's say I want to save this. So trigger is going to save in a file called .apxt file extension. Here you can see it. Okay, so yes, let me save. Okay, so let's go ahead and look on the standard navigation if there is something appearing. So I want to refresh it. Right, so our test trigger appeared, right? So we have created a trigger. So through developer console, we can create triggers, but we cannot deactivate triggers. Okay. So our creation, we can do it from the standard navigation and developer console. But if you want to deactivate a trigger, you can do it only in the standard navigation. Go to the setup, search for in the quick find box, search for Apex triggers, and there you find all the triggers. Click on the particular trigger which you want to deactivate. Yeah, let me show you. So here is our test trigger. Of course, we didn't write anything in this particular trigger. So if you want to deactivate, go to the trigger. Right. So this is how our trigger looks like. Okay, so the status is active, right? So if you want to deactivate, you can, if you want to delete, you can delete it. But usually we do the deactivation only for the triggers for, because in future we may be using this trigger again, right? So this is active checkboxes there, right? You have to uncheck and save, and this trigger is deactivated. Of course, we didn't write any business logic, but before insert, after insert, it is going to perform some kind of operations if we write the business logic here. So I have deactivated. So here, if you see, it's inactive. Okay. So yes, for creating triggers, standard navigation and the developer console, ideal ways to create it from the developer console. For deactivating, it's only the standard navigation we have. Okay. So coming to the type of triggers. So as we were discussing the different 7 events of DML events in triggers, so there are 2 different events, right? Before and after. So before insert, before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete, after undelete. So 7 operations. Okay. So based on that, the triggers has 2 types of triggers they are classified. That is before triggers and after triggers. So triggers has been categorized into 2 types based on DML events on which it will be fired. Okay. So before triggers means these triggers get fired before performing the operation inside the object. Before insert, before update, before delete. These are the operations, and the DML events which uses this DML events, those are called before triggers. Yeah. Why before triggers? Why after triggers? We are discussing because we have something called order of execution for triggers, and that's the important. That's where we will have to understand the type of triggers as well. And coming to after triggers, these triggers will get fired on after performing the operations on the object records, like after insert, after update, after delete, and after undelete. So 4 operations, right? So 2 types of triggers, before triggers and after triggers. Right. So let's move on to these. All these details are needed for us to write a trigger, but yeah, of course, it is a theory, but yes, all these are needed for us to write the trigger. So then next comes our trigger context variables. So trigger context variables means the variables which we are going to use within our triggers. So like, let's say in iterative statement, let's say for loop. So we are going to within the enhanced for loop or within the for loop definition, we are going to create some variables, right? So those are like context variable for that particular iterative state. Similarly, we have context variables for triggers also. So triggers are going to hold some values based on the transactions which we perform, based on the steps which we perform on the trigger. Okay. So within trigger, we can write multiple events business logic. Okay. To execute the business logic based on the event, we have to identify the status of the trigger. So way on which status. Okay. So based on that, we will be deciding how to proceed further. So to know the current status, we have 12 trigger context variables. Okay, so those variables are like trigger dot is insert, trigger dot is update, trigger dot is delete, trigger dot is undelete, trigger dot is before, is after, and is executing, trigger dot operation type, and trigger dot new, trigger dot new map, trigger dot old, and trigger dot old map. Of all this, like 12 trigger context variables. The frequent ones which we will be using is trigger.new and trigger.newMap, trigger.old, trigger.old map. So these are going to hold the new and old context values of that particular trigger, which it is executing. Okay, so let me share the notes to you. You can see and then we will be discussing. Okay. So based on the trigger, we have 12 context variables. Boolean, these are the return type. Boolean, that means true or false. So trigger dot is insert, it returns true if the trigger has been fired because of an insert operation, else it's false, right? So trigger dot is insert is going to hold a Boolean value, which is either true or false. So if insert operation is performed, it returns true. That's why trigger dot is insert. So this is our trigger context variable, trigger dot is insert. So while performing the operations, we will have to understand like what kind of operation our trigger is going to perform. That's where this context variables comes into picture. And that's where we are going to use the context variables for our context. Okay. So is update when update operation is performed, it's true. Is delete when has been fired because of a delete operation, when a delete has been performed, then this is true. So for us to understand this 6 operations, like, I mean, which operation we have performed right now, for us to understand within the trigger context, we can use this variable. So we can get the value of this and understand like which operation has been performed now, right? So trigger dot is undelete, it returns true if trigger has been fired because of undelete operation, and trigger dot is before returns true if the trigger is about to perform an operation, else it returns false. Trigger dot is after returns true if trigger is already done within the operation. So yeah, is before and is after, yes, we will be using most frequently in our real time. And this one, yes, we use it, but a little less frequent, I would say. Is before, is after, yes, we will be understanding these variables and we'll be using them more frequently. So let's see an example. Trigger, lead trigger on lead before insert and after insert. Okay. So if trigger dot is insert and trigger dot is before, write the validation code. Is insert means we are performing the insert or not. True. Is before, uh, about to perform the operation. Is it true? Yes. So if both are true, then I'm going to perform some operations. And if both are is after and is insert, if both are true, I'm going to perform some other operations. So that means before before I'm going to perform some operations, and after also I'm going to perform some operations. So this is how we can write like, so this is how we write the condition in our triggers. So we will be checking the current operations, what it is going to. So those values we are going to catch hold of them, and then only we are going to perform the operation. So that's how these context variables are used. Okay. So as I said, is before, is after are frequently used. So are we doing it before or are we doing it after? So that's where we are going to understand based on that, those context variables. So Boolean trigger dot is executing. It returns true if the trigger is currently performing the operations, else it returns false. Yes, this also will be useful in some cases to understand for us to get a message saying that this particular trigger is being executed now, currently. Okay. Trigger operation, trigger dot operation type. It is an enum enumeration which returns trigger event name on which it has been fired. It returns the event name in the form of constant as below. Okay. So what type of operation is getting performed on the trigger? We can also understand that with the help of trigger dot operation type. So it's going to return a constant variable. So these are the constant variables which we have. So I mean, these are already defined. So before insert, the system understands this particular constant value. So this also comes into picture in some real-time scenario. Yeah, here you can see trigger lead trigger on lead before insert and after insert switch. Okay, we are writing the switch case on trigger or dot operation. Okay, for all these 7 type of operations, we are performing different um, block of codes, making use of our switch statement, right? So after insert, write the code to copy the lead record to prospect, write the code to send an email alert. So here before insert, we are doing some validations, right? So this way we can make use of our enum, the operation type constant variables. Okay, so if you see these are the constant variables, that's where all these are in capital letters, and this particular variable the system can understand because it's a constant, defined constant. Okay. The next one is trigger dot new. So it is a context variable which holds the current context records in the form of a list collection. Syntax list as object type trigger dot new. This context variable will be available in insert, update, and undelete operations. We can't use this context variable in delete operations. Right. So this one is very important. So where every condition which we write is based on the trigger dot new usually in real time because we make use of it more frequently. Okay. So it's going to hold the current context records. So that means the records which we are processing, those set of records are going to be hold on trigger dot new. So it's a context variable and it is of type list. Okay, list collection. So it's holding all elements in the list. Okay, so it can be record type, records of records, right? So records of different objects also, right? So many things. So that's where we are accessing the current context records using the trigger dot new context variable. And trigger dot new map, it's the context variable which holds the context records in the form of map collection. As you can see the name itself. So here it's a list, trigger.new, it's going to be a list, and trigger.new map, it's going to be a map where record ID is the key and the complete record is the value. Okay, map ID is object type, trigger.new map. So the trigger dot, the return type of trigger dot new map is map collection type. Okay. So this context variable will be available after insert, update, and undelete operations. We can't use this context variable in delete before insert operations. The reason you will be understanding while performing the operations, I will explain you in more detail of that while we do the while we write a simple triggers, okay, trigger code, okay. So I'll explain you that, right? So that means like you will understand the context variable only like while we do the hands-on on it. So when I say context variables, so suppose I'm dealing with a list of account records. So which account records currently I'm working on in my trigger, those are hold in my trigger.new variable, new context variable. Okay. So if I'm dealing with the map type, trigger.new map, it is going to hold. And old is, it's a context variable which holds previous context records in the form of list collection. And this context variable will be available inside update and delete operations. It will not be available in insert. So see, insert, we are inserting new records, right? So the trigger.old will not have anything to hold in the trigger.old in the insert operation. That's where update and delete operations. So if you see update, I get a list of records which I need to update. So that's where the trigger.old is going to hold that particular records which I want to update. So insert operation, it's not available, right? So similarly, trigger.old map, it's a context variable which holds previous context records in the form of map collection. So, right. So, see, all these notes is very important. You will have usually frequently asked interview question, what is the difference between trigger.new and trigger.old, or trigger.new map and trigger.old map? Okay. So you can give the details, and yeah, I will explain like which variables it is holding while we write a program on the trigger. Okay, in more detail. So for basic thing, trigger.new will hold current context records which we are processing, and old will hold the previous context records which we want to process. Okay. So and trigger.new and old, it's dealing with list type of collections. Trigger.new map and trigger.old map, it's dealing with map type of collection, map collection. Right. So trigger bulkification, bulkify trigger. By using this approach, we can make sure trigger should be fired only once for collection of records. This can be implemented with the help of trigger context variables and iterative statements. Right. Yeah. As we already discussed the bulkification, so we will have to make use of bulkification as a best practice with the help of our collections. Okay. The reason being uh, not to hit the governor limits for simple type of operations. Okay. With the help of bulkification and the iterative statements, we and also the trigger context variables, we are going to achieve bulkification. So here, if you see, this can be implemented with the help of trigger context variable and iterative statements. Here, if you see, trigger account records on account before insert. If trigger dot is insert, that means whether we are performing insert operation or not, true. Is before, whether we are performing before or not, true. So these both are true for account record trigger dot new. So this trigger dot new is going to hold our account records which we want to process. Okay, trigger.new. So, and then we are writing the code for that particular context. Right. So, yeah, the triggers will take like 2 to 3 classes and we will complete it. I will help you writing triggers, before triggers and after triggers. Okay, so this is the basic idea of trigger. So triggers are used to get automatically fired based on the DML events which it has been defined. Okay, so how we are going to execute a trigger, how we are going, yeah, I have a question now. Yeah, everybody is here. So how you are going to execute a trigger? Anyone, any guesses? How we are going to execute a trigger? Guesses at least. No, no guesses.
No,
Okay, that's a wrong
because for
question.
the because for the class we use anonymous window. But
Yeah, okay. Let me answer. That's a wrong question. So we
no,
are
no.
not going to execute triggers at all. Okay.
Yeah,
Right?
triggers are the events which fire, right?
Right. That's correct. So how, if somebody asks you how you are going to execute a trigger, that's a wrong question. So triggers are, we are not going to manually do anything on the triggers. Triggers are automatically going to get fired when that particular DML events occur. Okay. So if I write a trigger to insert a DML account record, then it is going to get fired. Hey, yeah, that is all for today's class. I'm getting another call. We'll meet tomorrow. We'll have 2 classes tomorrow. Also, we will be discussing more on the triggers and we'll write sample triggers as well in the next classes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye.